Evening, everyone. We'd love to welcome all of you to tonight's event, Green Means Go, Demystifying the Stigma Around Medical Cannabis. We've got quite the lineup for you this evening, and we've all gathered here to talk about one of the hottest topics in the veteran community, medical cannabis. Across the country, military veterans are turning to medical marijuana as a treatment alternative to many of the chronic pain and mental health related conditions they struggle with after service. Now, despite the exponential increase in affirming medical research around medical cannabis worldwide, it has still been largely dismissed as a viable method of alternative care and healing, especially by government institutions. Now, since California legalized medical cannabis back in 1996, 39 states and the District of Columbia have followed suit. However, the lack of legalization or descheduling at the federal level presents many challenges to those seeking relief, including wildly varying medical cannabis prices, variations in quality and strands offered, geographic inaccessibility to dispensaries, criminalization while traveling interstate, and so much more. Now, the House of Representatives recently passed H.R. 3617, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, which would decriminalize cannabis at the federal level, but the battle has only just begun. The Department of Veterans Affairs has publicly stated that vets will not be denied their VA benefits because of cannabis use, and the VA also encourages vets to talk with their providers about said use. We'll talk more about tonight what that means and what the limitations are. Tonight, we'll hear from several members of the MBA community, all of whom have proudly served in the armed forces. They'll share their personal experience around medical cannabis, and we have a few extra surprises in store as well. We want to take this moment to shout out Cresco, who is proudly sponsoring this event tonight. And we want to let our audience members know that if you have any burning questions, we just want to have you place them in the Q&A, and we're going to move right on forward and answer at the end of the session tonight. Now, for those who don't know me, my name is Crystal Ellington, and I'm the communications director here at MVA. Now, my personal experience with medical cannabis is a pretty common one. So while I was serving, I was diagnosed with what's called the mental health trifecta, so PTSD, anxiety, and depression. At one point, I was taking 4 different medications just to get through a 24-hour period without anxiety attacks and night tremors. As with most medications, the side effects were pretty severe. I was super groggy, cotton mouth, mood swings, you name it. But I was a dutiful patient and took my medications as prescribed for over a year. Shortly thereafter, I was medically discharged for the Army, as these medications combined with my diagnoses made it difficult, if not impossible, for me to carry out my duties as a helicopter mechanic. Upon my release, I began to seek more holistic methods of managing my conditions. A good friend of mine, who is also a veteran, suggested medical cannabis for my anxiety. So, like most vets, I was really skeptical about the impact it would have on my access to VA benefits, which we'll touch on more tonight's event, but I was at my wit's end. I did my research and I was amazed at all the resources and methods available. You got flower, vapes, gummies, you name it. So I began my medical cannabis journey last year and haven't looked back since. So we're gonna go ahead and get started tonight, jump right into introductions of all of our wonderful panelists this evening. So everyone, as you're introducing yourself, we're gonna ask your name, pronouns, state you're located in, plus current legalization status if you know it, and a little bit about your medical cannabis journey. So I'm gonna go across who I see first. I'm gonna start with Ash.
Hi, I'm Ash Wallace. My pronouns are she, her. And I currently live in Colorado, where it is legal both for medical marijuana and recreational. And I actually, once we moved to Colorado in 2015, I think, I was heavily over-medicated with lots of misdiagnoses that were, it turned out was complex PTSD. And I just felt awful all the time with the pharmaceuticals that I was on and how much I was on. And I started using medicinal patches. And I don't smoke, but there's so many alternatives. So I've been able to utilize those, and I got to stop taking my Ambien, and I significantly reduced the amount of Klonopin I take for anxiety. So it's been great.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ash, and for mentioning to our audience that, you know, another method of actually taking the medical cannabis, because a lot of people think there's just, the flower and the vapes, and I also have a deployment story about Ambien. It's not good. All right, moving on. We are going to go with Lindsay Church, one of my favorite humans.
Well, hello. I think we all have a story of Ambien. I'm just saying it. So anyways, I'm Lindsay Church. I use they, them pronouns. I am in Richmond, Virginia, where it is medically legal, technically recreationally legal, but you can't buy it anywhere. So it doesn't really help you yet. They had a 4-year rollout plan of recreational marijuana that is still in the process. We're not sure when it's supposed to happen, but it will happen, I hope, soon. I served in the Navy from 2008 to 2012. I was medically retired after a series of really terrible surgeries in which they took my chest, broke it open, took my cartilage, took off many inches of bones. I nearly died, spent 55 days in the hospital. Much like you, Ash, I was heavily over medicated. I was on 16 different medications at one time. I was on fentanyl patches with Oxycontin and oxycodone for breakthrough, and I nearly threw myself out a 5th floor window. So my story of all of that, I was medically retired, came back home to Washington State. Shout out to Washington. I at some point in that journey decided I wanted to take my own journey into my own hands, because I thought that I knew that if I stayed on painkillers, I was going to take my own life. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And so about 7 or 8 years ago, I started to use medical cannabis or through the recreational dispensaries, and I never looked back. It changed my life. I'm a better human for it. You would have hated me. I hated me when I was on all of the medications. I now take one medication plus allergy medication. Does that count? I stopped taking 15 of those medications and live a better life because of it.
So thank you so much for sharing, Lindsay. And I think I can speak for everyone on this panel and at NVA when we say we are so glad you're still here with us. And I also appreciate you taking the Green Means Go theme seriously, just like I did. So appreciate you. All right, next on my screen, I have Landon.
Awesome. Thank you. My name's Landon. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm calling in from Western Massachusetts in Williamstown, to be exact. So in Massachusetts, medical was legalized in 2012. Recreational was decriminalized in 16, and there are dispensaries scattered all across the state. Different towns have different regulations, and some actually can refuse to allow a dispensary to set up shop. But that means that you will also have multiple shops in the same area, and you don't really have dispensary deserts. You might not have one in a town, but you'll have several scattered just outside of the outskirts. Right now, the excise tax ranges, like the total tax will range between 17 and 20% effective on any recreational cannabis, which means the gross total sales have reached from about 2 billion since 2018, and just in 21 alone, it was nearly 1 billion. So we are seeing, yeah, it's been a great income for the states. And when you have a medical card that's tax-free, and veterans get a particular discount on it as well. If you're a 100% disabled veteran, some of these dispensaries, you also get an additional discount on top of it. And Massachusetts is really leaning into trying to make this accessible for people. There's also state legislation in the works to improve the medical cannabis process and to try and make this more accessible for people. Post-military, I went from the military into the skilled trades, so it took me quite a while to be able to start exploring. But when I left the service, I was on 7 different medications, and we kept rotating, trying to find the right combination to reduce the side effects and just find something I could live with. And when I left the skilled trades, I was finally able to start experimenting with cannabis, and it allowed me to reduce my prescriptions and severely increased my quality of life. So now I'm on I'm still on several prescriptions, but I've reduced the ones for my mental health, and I'm down to just my ADHD medication now for my mental health. Cannabis has replaced most of those, has replaced everything else pertaining to my mental health. It's helping me manage pain. It's helping with a lot of different things. And it's just really improved my quality of life. It can't replace my allergy medication and a couple other things, but maybe someday.
One can only hope because I am really tired of taking allergy medication. And I live in Florida, so it's allergy season all year round. So, all right, next in line we have, let's see, we have Robert. Welcome to the panel.
Hello, everybody. Name's Robert Kowalski. I go by he, him. From Ohio, but calling in from Tucson, Arizona. I'm here visiting, working, so doing all that fun stuff. I actually I served in the Air Force from 2006 to 2011 as a security forces member. Have 2 combat deployments under my belt, both to Iraq. When I returned home from my second deployment, things went spiraling out of control for me quite quickly. And like most of you, I then started receiving a bunch of pills trying to solve these problems. Those pills started getting really, really crazy on me, especially being a small guy. And this was the time when really information was really coming out about medical cannabis in general. And this was a time when New Mexico was really taking on a fight for PTSD access to medical cannabis. So doing my research, I chose a pretty selfish path and chose to use cannabis while active duty. After about 6 months of using cannabis and actually improving myself, improving my ability to do my job and what was asked of me to do my job, led to a urinalysis test, which eventually led to a journal under honorable discharge, where they took my pay, they took my rank, they took my education, my GI Bill away from me. And so when I was finally discharged, I became homeless. I was homeless for a year, trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do and how I was going to get out of a situation that I found myself in, all because I chose to use a plant to better my life. Started going through the VA. It took about a year for the VA to get me through their diagnosis process to re-diagnose me for the same things that active duty military diagnosed me for. I was up to 16 different medications for sleep problems, pain problems, PTSD, mild TBI issues. Finally, I said, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go the route that got me in this mess in the first place. And I moved here to Arizona actually in 2012 and got the first recommendation for PTSD, for the symptoms of PTSD, about 3 years before it actually became a qualifying condition, just because I had enough medication I could line a doctor's desk with it all. And so with that, about 6 months later, I stopped taking all 16 medication. I haven't touched a medication since. And that was my driving force into this movement. I got involved in advocacy in 2015, helped write legislation in the state of Ohio that to include veteran language in it. In 2017, founded a nonprofit in 2017 called Veterans Ending the Stigma to help share education and to start taking control of our own veteran voice as it pertains to what we actually need and not having others tell us what we need. So in that sense, led into my work in working at the state level and national level, fighting for federal access because as veterans, patients, I was then invited to work with the Weed for Warrior Project as their political coordinator, working on federal issues there. In 2018, I went to the United Nations and helped fight with a small team over there on trying to change the international treaty on cannabis so that we can start breaking down some of these walls and barriers that we know of about our federal government, and have still been pushing at the federal level as much as I can with a great team of people currently, and trying to ensure that veterans aren't left behind in the conversation and that we are able to hold the federal government accountable for the contracts that we have all signed with their name on it for our healthcare. So that's me in a nutshell, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Robert. You actually touched on a point that I have seen too many times among some of my battle buddies, among people that have come after me, and that is active duty members taking advantage of medical cannabis because they are at their wits' end, and it's the only thing that really helps, that doesn't have all of the side effects as some of this other medication. So we really appreciate the fact that you are joining in the fight to make sure that veterans and service members can take advantage of, as you said, a plant. So thank you. All right, last but not least, we have Kimmy, the one and only.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's very nice to talk to me. Yeah. Also, my name is Camilla Flanoy. I am a Marine. I am now and been in the state of Georgia and live in Atlanta, where it's very illegal here. THC is legal in small amounts, and that's only if it's mixed with CBD oil. And that's the only way you can get that. And you have to have a medical marijuana card issued by the state of Georgia to get it, which they charge out the ass for. So yeah, that's the best thing they could do right now. Plus, we had a couple of things on the floor for them to vote on, but they let them die without getting a vote this year so far. So they're dead. So they have to reintroduce everything again back to the floor for Georgia. So a little bit about me. I was a big, strong, I was on the other side of cannabis use for a very long time. It was say no to dope with me, but it was because of my job when I first got out of the Marine Corps. I was a sheriff deputy. So I was already like, any drug is a bad drug, no matter what it is. Gateway this, gateway that. It was a no for me until I got sick in 2017 and I had cancer. I ended up getting stage 3, very aggressive form of breast cancer with an 80% growth rate. And I was doing chemo, but I dropped a lot of weight. I lost a lot of nutrients. I was not eating. My husband and my family members did not like what they were seeing. So my husband talked me into at least try it. You have to eat. So it was more of making someone else happy. That's the reason why I tried it, because everybody was looking at me like, we don't want you to die. You need to eat in order to fight cancer because you're doing chemo. It was so many layers to that. So I tried it. I started eating again, getting a little appetite so I could eat, so I could fight what I was going through. And I found out that, yeah, marijuana is not a gateway drug. It's more of an end all. You know, there's plenty of other stuff to get hooked on. I think this is the safest. So it was one of those, it was a life-changing, life-saving thing for me in that instant. And I never thought to use it for any other reason, because I do have MST. I have combat PTSD. I have breathing problems. I have anxiety. I got diagnosed with all this, but was taking all those pills and not realizing all those pills messing up my liver, my kidneys, everything. My numbers were all out of whack because of the extra medication the VA was giving me. Technically, the VA is the biggest drug pusher there is. So it was one of those things. Do I want to mess up the body I do have, or do I want to find a better way to alleviate some of the strain that I have? But I'll tell you more about it later. So.
All right, thank you so much for sharing, Kimmy. We're so glad to have you. And we are going to get started, just going to jump right in because we have a lot of stuff to share with you this evening. So first question goes to Robert. So from personal experience, I understand there's a lot of misinformation and fear surrounding medical cannabis in the veteran community. Could you talk about some of those stigmas and why they're so harmful to the cannabis movement and veteran health as a whole?
Man, it's such a loaded question right off the bat because there's so much. And So I would say first and foremost, something in real time would be workforce protection, right? So most veterans are coming out of the military with a security clearance. And with that security clearance opens up a lot of doors within the workforce that not a lot of civilians really have access to that such a young age with the capability of such a smooth transition process. Um, with cannabis laws and regulations being how they are and still being illegal at the federal level, it's almost a sure thing that your security clearance is going to be lost. Um, so one of the things is that I come across with veterans is when they deal with this issue is they're faced with a dilemma. Is it my health care or is it me going to work and maintaining this clearance? Some have been able to maintain their clearance working in the jobs that they work in, but it is very few and far in between. I think it's a problem, and until federal law changes, it's going to continue to be a problem. Federal employees in and of themselves, look at how many memos have come out last year. Federal employees either being fired from their job or being prohibited from even qualifying for the hiring process because of prior cannabis use or current cannabis use. So with that, it's a real big issue. Another real big issue, I would say, amongst the veteran community would be your Second Amendment right and gun issues. A lot of states, specific, like the state I'm in here right now, Arizona is an open carry state. But if you're required to go through a CCW process or go through the process of even purchasing a weapon, that background check and the paperwork questionnaire that you're required to answer walks a very fine line as far as cannabis use and if it's legal for you to even own or purchase that firearm. Veterans find comfort in firearms. We're trained highly in firearms. And it's one of those things that a majority of veterans would like to hang on to, which again is prohibitive in them facing, do I take my recreational enjoyment or do I focus on my health care? I would say those are the two biggest stigmas that we're seeing as far as the information being pushed. And I would say maybe lastly, the third big one would be research. So cannabis in and of itself is one of the most researched substances on this planet. So by constantly coming back and saying more research and more research, it's like how much more can we give you before we're out of research to do on something like this? And to constantly hear it from the federal government when directive has been in place now for 10 years that's supposed to be collecting data specifically on us veterans within the VA system utilizing cannabis. And so I think now more it should be a question of where's our research and not we need more of it, but where is it, where has it been, and why isn't it being done now more?
Right, that makes a lot of sense, especially the fact that they research veterans for everything else. So this would be something that would be highly helpful. And I mean, essentially, I think the VA is probably shying away from it because, put them out of business with the medications. But those views are my own, not the views of Minority Vets with America. Just want to put that disclaimer out there. Okay, so moving along the program, I just want to go ahead and speak to Lindsay about some of these fears among vets. Now, you've recently had a run-in at your local VA that could also be impacting some vets without their knowledge. We want you to share a little bit more about that experience and why this should be common knowledge among vets using medical cannabis.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the disclaimer, even though, we share some opinions. Robert, to your point about stigmatization and not being able to access federal jobs, I was actually supposed to sit on the 90-day independent review commission of sexual assault in the military, but couldn't get through the clearance process. So I never actually got to sit on that. So it's happening and it continues to happen, and many people are getting caught that we don't even know about. But back to cannabis and being a veteran. So I was from the state of Washington. I now live in the state of Virginia. Lovely laws have changed, and so have many things, including people's mindsets. I got rid of all of my medication, refused to go on a pain contract because I will not pass a drug test. I will always fail. And I don't want access to painkillers. So I take a substance that's considered a Schedule 5 anticonvulsant. If you're familiar with the scheduling system, anything Schedule 1 through 5 is considered a controlled substance. You are supposed, depending on where you are, who your doctor is, and how it all works, you might have to go into a pain contract. My doctor and I have been able to work through this and be able to get my medication through VA. There have been many snags along the way, including one recently when I was getting ready to go on a vacation to Mexico, which I desperately needed. Was leaving at 5 a.m. and was trying to get my provider to send me my medication or give me an opportunity for me to pick it up. Turns out my provider was sick for an entire month, which meant that I had to find a backup provider within the clinic. Well, the backup provider was not as cool as my current provider, and my backup provider, without my knowledge, without my conversation, without an appointment, decided she was going to use what is called the State Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. So many people are not familiar with this, and I need you all to pay close attention, story time. So the State Prescription Drug Monitoring Program is where they track all of your dispensary purchases. So you think you're using a recreational dispensary, it's not the same. Every time that you go, you have to put in an order. It's because it's a prescription. It's all being tracked through the state system, through your cannabis card. No big deal. Not a bit I don't really think about this, right? Well, turns out, so I got a denial from my backup provider. She said, I'm not comfortable writing that prescription. I figured it was because it says cannabis user or something, somewhere. They can't get my pronouns correct, but they can always manage to find that I use cannabis. So here I am, I'm talking to my provider. She says, the backup provider says, absolutely not. And I ask, hey, can I be seen? And they're like, no, we're not, she doesn't want to see you. I was like, excuse me, wait, what happened to the rule? They can't deny you access or deny you benefits. Well, that's true. They can't deny you benefits. They can, however, change your care. So what happened was that doctor decided that because I take a Schedule 5 drug, she was going to use this thing called the State Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. What the policy says is that VA has to, if you're taking a Schedule 1 through 5 or any type of pain contract or contract with the VA, they have to run your records once a year. Every dispensary purchase that you have will be run and then put into your VA medical record. So everything on my VA medical records now shows my dispensary purchases because the VA needs to know that I bought a 0.5 gram raspberry lemonade cartridge on December 12th. So now all of my medical records have all of my dispensary purchases. And so while this does, you're part of the state system, you're part of the VA system, what happens is they have an information sharing agreement with 49 states. I don't know what the 50th is, but I'm going to move there. 49 states have this agreement with the federal government in which they have to do this, and it's a requirement to do this once a year. So if you are part of a state medical dispensary program, your medical records will at some point probably have your dispensary purchases. So if you live in a state where you have the opportunity to spend an extra 17%, I absolutely would. Because what's happening is that this information is being pulled by VA as a prescription and then being brought into a system and being treated as an illicit substance. So what's happening is this information sharing is supposed to be happening in good faith to be able to help with your medical care. But since they can't even talk to you so much, they can't even talk to you about your prescriptions and the things that you're using, it's actually not being done in good faith. And so I think all veterans need to know this, that you are absolutely your medical purchases are being tracked, and they could have at some point show up in your VA medical record. But they can't deny your benefits. So your disability payment's going to keep coming. You just might not get the medication that's going to save your life. It's fine.
I really appreciate you sharing this story, Lindsay, because it just shows how panels like this are so timely and so relevant. And a lot of people will try to have us believe that medical cannabis is, something that's a left issue or it's a progressive issue. No, it's a people issue. And it's an alternative health issue. And for those in our audience, I just dropped a PDF in the link that details this a little bit more about the various state approved marijuana programs. So, okay, moving right along. Next, we're going to have a chat with Ash. So you're currently with the Veterans Community Project and you previously served as a community health worker with Mental Health Partners. What are some of the ways that you feel medical cannabis positively impacts some of the lives of the vets that you serve?
There have been so many positive impacts that veterans have shared regarding their use of medical cannabis. I believe we're all unfortunately well aware of the use of alcohol being prevalent in active military and veteran communities. And I've spoken with veterans who have cut back or stopped drinking entirely through the use of medical cannabis. And they say they feel much better. There's no hangover. And they're literally just using it to go to sleep and then try it again the next day rather than drinking, and all of the problems that compound with that. And I've also heard over and over again how a veteran has been able to reduce the amount of pharmaceutical drugs that they're taking to treat comorbid conditions under the PTSD diagnosis, particularly like highly addictive pharmaceuticals used to treat insomnia and anxiety, like Klonopin and Ambien and all these things. And veterans using medical cannabis in conjunction with their antidepressant and therapy have told me they've noticed a reduced intensity of suicidal ideation and depression and anxiety and sleep disorders and rage. Anybody with anger issues has been seeing a lot of positive impact with their use of medical cannabis. And a few veterans I've spoken with said they've been able to completely stop taking their pharmaceutical medications because of alternative therapies, like using medical cannabis along with, doing equine therapy or art therapy or something like that. So it's been huge for a lot of people that I've worked with.
I'm super glad to hear that. I have actually had the opportunity to speak to a few vets that were struggling with alcoholism, and they quote unquote would Cali sober. And for you, those of you who don't know, that means that you only do marijuana and you're not drinking or doing any other drugs. And it has been extremely helpful. So thank you so much for sharing, Ash. Okay, next question is for Landon. We're going to get a little bit political right now with some policy stuff. So from a policy standpoint, why is it so important that a bill like HR 3617 be codified and signed into law, and how does it impact veterans?
Okay, so this is the fun stuff. So HR 3617 is the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act. It passed 220 to 204, which meant it had some Republican support. And one key component of this bill is that it will decriminalize marijuana. However, the Senate hasn't voted, and the last time this happened, they let the act die in committee. The House passes a lot of things, and the Senate lets them die. So the same day that this act actually passed, the Senate was applauding themselves for again unanimously passing S253 to expand medical and scientific research on the safety and potential health benefits of medical cannabis. This is identical to the same bill they have passed previously. So they were just really proud of themselves for doing the same thing they've already done. All of the bills that specifically address veterans and marijuana are in the House. And there are several of them that would all encourage or allow veterans to discuss their medical cannabis use with their healthcare providers without fear of negative repercussions, to make sure they're not denied benefits or care, and to make sure that their medical cannabis would not affect the veteran's eligibility for care. And so the key components here, as I think we just heard from Lindsay, is that we need something to cover veterans. And if it's not going to be a federal bill, it needs to be something else, because VHA Directive 1315 says veterans who live in states with medical programs can talk to their VA doctors about their medical cards. Official VA policy does not allow discrimination against veterans who acquire their medical cards in states where it's allowed, or the denial of benefits, but providers still can refuse care. They can still require a urinalysis test, which then will show a Schedule 1 drug, which cannabis is, which is absurd. We'll get more into that later on in the session. And so if there is a urinalysis that shows a Schedule 1 drug, then they can deny prescribing you a Schedule 2 through 5, and they can refuse care. And your cannabis use is noted in your medical records. And so your information is then noted into your medical records. It follows you for the rest of your time. And even if you're fortunate, like I am, or like some of us are, to have providers who don't care, and you're in a state that is willing to work with you, if you move states or you have to move providers, you're playing Russian roulette. And it's already hard enough to move VA care and to move providers. Now you add in, I don't know if I move and I need if I need a provider who's going to prescribe me my ADHD medication, I don't know if that's going to be able to happen. Like that's a scheduled controlled substance. Like, and then what happens right now, VA providers cannot currently recommend, much less like they can't support, much less recommend medical marijuana to address chronic pain or mental health issues. And we know opioid use and like chronic pain and chronic mental health issues are well overrepresented in the veteran community. And so opioid use is also like the VA hands out pills like candy. They're working on it and they have made huge strides. But what if we could reduce that? But they can't because they can't condone medical cannabis. And so, and then we add in the PDMP, the prescription drug monitoring program that Lindsay was talking about earlier. And we end up in a situation where we desperately do need these bills to pass. We need some kind of federal decriminalization. We need federal expungement of records. We need people to be able to choose their own path of health care. And we need veterans to be able to work with their providers and be honest about the treatment and what works for them in a way that's actually going to make sure veterans are getting treatments and don't have to try and hide things from their care teams, because that's not going to do anybody any good. And it's just going to end up with delayed treatment, deferral of services, or people losing out on care. And quite frankly, that's not what our nation's veterans deserve. And it doesn't do our providers any favors either, because their jobs are already hard enough. Like, I don't envy anybody who's trying to be a doctor right now. You've got like 15 minutes to meet with a patient.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Landon. You touched on quite a few hot topics there, but one of the main ones that stood out for me was the level of trust that it takes for veterans to have in their medical team. And things like this cause erosion of trust. We don't trust our doctors. They don't, see us for the things that we need to be addressed. So I think that being able to be transparent and honest and candid with those providers will only happen if veterans are aware of things like this and, things actually move forward in the right direction for alternative care. Also, the fact that you were really excited about that policy stuff, I have questions. I'm gonna wait until later. Okay, next up, we have Kimmy. So your community involvement keeps you really busy. So you're with VSOs like us, Minority Vets, Whoop Whoop, RWB, The Mission Continues, and even find time to produce songs with the Veterans Music Project. I'm not gonna embarrass you and play your video tonight, so it's okay. So how does medical cannabis factor into your day-to-day life? And how did you come to use medical cannabis in your post-military life?
Well, let me start with this. I volunteer with a lot of organizations, a lot of VSOs. Some of the older VSOs, we're not going to name them, but we call them the good old boys. And being with the organization like that, I saw that the Vietnam veterans, that era, they use alcohol as their, way of getting away from their anxiety or their PTSD. Our generation don't want to use alcohol because alcohol messes you up in the long run. We see all the issues they're having. We don't want to have those same issues. We came to the alternative way to deal with our issues without using prescription drugs and alcohol. And we didn't want to go as far as using heroin because that just kills you. It's just, you have to look at what's here and what is better for your system versus what's out there. I deal with a lot of different people on a day-to-day basis. And my anxiety will shoot through the roof if I'm dealing with the wrong person. So I know for a fact, I might need to have my vape pen on standby. I might need to have that, just for, okay, hold on, before I say the wrong thing and turn this person away or say something that might upset both of us, let me take a step back. This is going to help me. I know what's going to help me. So I'll just go off to the corner, and that's just me. I'm not an everyday user. I use when I need to. It's as needed. When it comes to a lot of the other stuff out there, it's not as needed. There are other worse things to get hooked on or to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Addicted to, and has way worse consequences. So this is a better consequence for me in my everyday life. I have small kids at home. You know, I have to be able to keep moving. I have to be able to chase them around. I have to be able to function during the day. This is what I choose, and this helps me function at home and in at work. It's one of those things where, like, now I use a little bit more because my cancer came back. So now I'm dealing with that, and I'm using a little bit more for pain issues on that front. So that's helping me keep control and keep my anxiety at bay. Because if I didn't have that, I might be drinking. I might be using other harmful substances. So this is what's helping me make sure that my kids are not lacking, my home life is not lacking, the volunteering I am doing is not lacking.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kimmy. I think that especially with parents, there is a lot of stigma still around marijuana use, and not realizing that having marijuana to calm you down and to just, level out and make sure you're not yelling at your kids or your husband or your wife or anybody else in the house. And doing that instead of taking a sip from a flask or taking a painkiller to cope with those things, you're literally using a plant. So thank you so much for contributing to kind of getting away from that stigma. So, okay, next question, as Landon would say, to the fun stuff. So according to the Drug Enforcement Agency, cannabis is currently a Schedule I substance, while many narcotics and opioids are Schedule IIs. Now, this question is for Robert and Landon. Can you tell us what this means and why it's an integral piece of the fight for legislation? And we're going to start with Robert.
Oh man. So particularly cannabis being a Schedule One, it was placed there. We should start by why it was placed there, right? So it was placed there under reasons of an individual who had other motives without any scientific fact to place this plant at Schedule One. Furthermore, we need to recognize that treaties here in the United States are recognized as laws of the land in our country, just as much as any legislative law or bill passed in Congress. So when we look at this, we go to the International Drug Treaty of 61 that placed cannabis as a Schedule One and a Schedule 4, I believe, narcotic, deeming it had very little medical and could only be utilized for medical and scientific purposes under strict regulations. Schedule One here in the US is a little different than that. It states right in it that cannabis in and of itself has no medical value whatsoever. With that, we all know to not be true. And furthermore, it goes against the guise of the international treaty stating that it does have, it can be used as a medicine and it needs to be researched as such. We're also finding that it being a Schedule One narcotic prohibits researchers and creates a lot of barriers within the research community in receiving access to material or approval to study cannabis for the benefit of mankind. Rather, we've been focused on the harms that this plant possibly could do to humans. And with that, I believe that funding's been misplaced. Go ahead, Landon. I'll let you kind of jump in here and take a little stab at it.
Cool, thank you. So, and it's gonna be hard to build on that one. So the Controlled Substances Act, as codified under 21 USC section 812, defines Schedule I drugs as those with no currently accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. So these are the most dangerous but potentially severe psychological or physical dependence. That includes LSD, heroin, MDMA, and marijuana. Schedule 2, which is high potential for abuse and a currently accepted medical use and treatment or with severe restrictions, cocaine, morphine, Vicodin, Percocet, fentanyl. And then we work our way down to Schedule 5, low potential for abuse. Examples include Robitussin AC. Unscheduled, alcohol and tobacco. So when we're looking at what this means and why moving from a Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 versus like descheduling altogether is important. If we move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, then, well, first off, it's, in my opinion, completely absurd, and also entirely agree with Roberts that the rationale for it being in, the historic rationale for it being in Schedule 1 makes no scientific sense whatsoever. And the motivations, just not getting into that tonight, we don't have enough time. The VA only prescribes Schedule 2 through 5 drugs for obvious medical reasons. And it's also important to know that patients can be prescribed multiple opioids from different DEA schedules. So you can actually be prescribed opioid stacks where the medications have varying addictive risks. So I point this out because it's not a matter of worrying about addictiveness or the dangers of that when we are worrying about whether or not something is addictive when we're talking about schedules, like, because doctors are not worried about this as much as it may sound as if they are, because people are getting prescribed things from 2 through 5. But if something does get moved, so if cannabis gets moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, it's still going to be regulated in a way that doesn't make sense when compared to everything else that is in Schedule 2. Cocaine and cannabis, very different substances. And it would also continue to make clinical trial research more difficult than it is, because the government's only research facility is a 12-acre farm at the University of Mississippi that's run by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And so, yes, they've done a ton of research on it, but all of their samples come from this one space. And rescheduling would also not solve for the business financing and the tax and other compliance issues that businesses, particularly small and minority-owned cannabis businesses, face in states where sales are legal. And it would continue to mischaracterize the safety of cannabis in relation to the other substances. Whereas if we deschedule cannabis entirely, then it would just end up down in the same like tier as alcohol, over-the-counter drugs that you would need a prescription for, like Sudafed. If you want real Sudafed, you need a prescription for it, or you go to the pharmacy for it. Or tobacco for recreational purposes, like alcohol and tobacco would be the equivalent for recreational cannabis. So I think, in my personal opinion, as well as for the sake of the small business owners, as the sake of the industry, tax revenue that I mentioned when we first started, like all signs point to descheduling, making the absolute most sense. From a financial standpoint, banks can't actually finance cannabis businesses right now because of the fact that it's a Schedule 1 drug federally. Like, there's so many things in play right now that moving it to a Schedule 2 doesn't actually help from an economic standpoint. And those barriers are going to continue to be in place, especially for the minority-owned businesses and the smaller shops that would benefit the most from this emerging market.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, that was very thorough from both of my policy folks, Robert and Landon. Thank you guys so much for explaining more about the scheduling and why it's important in our cannabis fight moving forward. So we have about roughly 12 minutes left, and I personally have a burning question. See, did it again. So for Ash and Kimmy, how can VSOs and other veteran-facing organizations be affirming in veterans' medical cannabis use and also help to fight the stigmas that exist right now?
I'll jump in if that's okay. So like being outspoken and fighting against that perpetuating stigma, like we can just talk about it. And that's one of the best ways that we can destigmatize it. We can also advocate to clinicians that we meet in networking groups and webinars to set aside their biases and work with veterans who have found that medical cannabis can be a useful tool in their treatment plan. And as peers, we share our experiences, just as we would with how well going to therapy at the vet center has helped, or yoga, or whatever has helped make your symptoms lessen or helped you function better day to day. And Veterans Community Project partners with medical cannabis companies who are happy to provide a discount for veterans and prescribers who recently actually came out to the village in Kansas City to assist anyone in the residential program interested in obtaining their medical card to get that accomplished free of charge. So medical cannabis providers want to help, and VSOs being open to these partnerships is a really great way to help fight against the stigma and just put it out there to the public and say, hey, this works for us as veterans. It works for veterans that we're serving. So we want you to know how great this is, and it shouldn't be this taboo thing that we're afraid to use.
I agree with Ash on that, speaking up about it. And I always go to our older generation, especially those who are 60 and up. Here in Georgia, they have this thing about, a lot of them do use marijuana. They don't use medical marijuana, but they use marijuana. And when you go to them and say, well, you guys use this product, why not go to the VAs like you normally do for everything else and speak up about the product that you do use? Oh, and they don't want to do that. They're happy to say, well, we use alcohol, we don't want to lose our benefits. The main stigma that all the younger generations believing in, because the older generations is telling them, this is what happens. If you educate that older generation and get them to stop repeating the false narrative that's there, then that will have the trickle down effect, because they do have a lot of pull when it comes to that VA system. The American Legions, the VFWs, they have a lot of pull when it comes to the VA. And I hate to say it, you have to educate them in order to get everybody else who's listening to them to follow along sometimes. And I've been there where I've had conversations and I've talked to them. And then after we've had this 2 or 3 day conversation, then they'll go to the VA and start talking to their doctors about, well, what if I use this instead of taking that pill? Can this help? And the doctor will say the same thing. I can't tell you not to do it, but as a federal employee, I can't tell you to do it. And that's here in Atlanta, that's every doctor's cop out in Atlanta. I can't tell you to do it because of where I work, but I can't tell you not to do it because it helps you. So it's just once you get them to understand that you could go to your doctor without losing your benefits, they will tell everybody who's underneath them. It's like a pyramid scheme, kind of, sort of, but not really. You know, you get one person up top to do it and it trickles down. Just saying.
Trickle down
So
weedonomics.
much. Oh, sorry. What was that, Lindsay?
Trickle down weedonomics.
Facts. Well, I totally agree, especially Kimmy, with you touching on the VFWs and a lot of these organizations that have been around for a lot longer. I think that they have one of the largest voices when it comes to talking to the VA. So I think it's up to our generation to really push that and make sure that the folks that are in our circle, VFWs, you know, all these other VSOs that have been around for quite some time, to really push them to end the stigma. So, okay, so about 7 minutes. For our last question, I'm going to address this to Lindsay and Robert, but anybody can chime in if they have something to add. For those that aren't ready to be at the forefront of the fight, but want to actively be involved, how do they start? And I will start with you, Lindsay.
So there's a lot of ways you can be involved. I think some folks have touched on it, like there's the micro and the macro. There's the micro, that's the conversations that you're having with one another, the conversations about it, you know, Kimmy talking about, we talk to each other. It's very much like a veteran, I don't know how to, like, it's like an endorsement thing that, like, when one of us says it, the other person follows. And I think that there's conversations to be had in, like, destigmatizing within our own community that we need to be doing on a regular basis. So whether you use cannabis or not, I know lots of people who don't use cannabis that also, like, have seen the lives that it's changed in just, like, the few folks that they do know. So you don't have to use cannabis to know that it saved lives, like myself, like everybody that has talked, you know, like, we just having those conversations is important. But if you don't want to be, like, like the face of cannabis, which I completely understand because I've gone through some shit, let me tell you. Yeah, and I think many folks who are on this have gone through some things when it comes to this. So if you're not ready to step in there are things that you can do in the middle. We talked about the MORE Act. The MORE Act is sitting in the Senate waiting for somebody to do something on it, and it has been before. You can call your senator. I'm going to drop you a link to, if you don't know how to contact your senator, this is how you do it. You can contact your senator and you can say, hey, I need you to move this because there are veterans like myself that are really challenged and struggling to keep access to their, VA care. Whether VA says they won't, remove your benefits, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't change your care. So having those conversations, you as a veteran can move the needle in a place where somebody else can't. I can walk into a senator's office and say, I'm missing 36 inches of ribs, every bit of cartilage in my chest, and I'm held together by metal wire. Please tell me why I shouldn't use medical cannabis instead of these 16 medications that nearly check me out a window. Like, those are conversations that you can move a needle that many other people can't, because we didn't fight and do everything that we did just to come back and be denied access to the care that we vitally need. So use your voice in whatever way that you can. Contact your senator. They are also, as a veteran, you are a constituent of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, which means that you can call any one of those House members and you can say, hey, I'm a veteran. I technically am one of your constituents. I need help. I need you to start pushing the issue of cannabis. I dropped in the chat there's a couple different bills. Rep. Barbara Lee has been championing a bill called the Veterans Marijuana Safe Harbor Act, which would empower veterans to get their cannabis from their provider, be able to get prescriptions from their provider. It would invest in research, and it would allow you to carry cannabis if you were stopped by a police officer on a VA campus. Because if you are carrying on a VA campus, you are on federal land. Just FYI, if you are stopped, you can get in trouble because you are on federal land. So don't think that you're protected just because you have a cannabis card, because it doesn't matter. So that bill would actually make it so that you wouldn't get in trouble, because when you think about the issue of cannabis, if you are experiencing homelessness, you are likely carrying your cannabis with you everywhere. You're not stopping somewhere to drop it off at an Amazon gear locker. Like, that's not real. This isn't what's happening. And so we need to be thinking about, how does our community that disproportionately experiencing the mental health crisis, that disproportionately experiences homelessness, that is impacted by these laws every single day. Use your voice, call those folks. There's like 30 something of them, probably more. I'm very bad at numbers, but call them, tell them that you want to see this come up for at least discussion. When we have these hearings, we have hearings on extremism, we have hearings on everything else, and ranging from everything, but why can't we talk about cannabis? I don't think that we've talked about a single cannabis bill this session. I might be wrong. We have until the end of this year to get anything through this session. Otherwise, we have to start all the way back over at the beginning in the next Congress, which starts next year. So anything that we want to get through, at least in for a discussion or conversation, it has to happen now. There are other ways that you can get involved. You can work with organizations like MBA. You can work with other organizations like Reducing the Stigma, and you can work with other organizations that are really tossing in all of their effort and weight behind the cannabis fight, and volunteer with them. Give time, give money, give resources, connections, anything that you can. I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to let Robert talk, because, excuse me.
Oh man, I don't know
Please
how to
let
follow.
everyone know how they can get involved with Vets Ending the Stigma. And
I'm
it's
sorry,
part
I
of
said
your
reducing
answer.
the stigma. I apologize.
Okay.
Oh, you're okay. No, I don't know how I could follow that up other than, just to reiterate, show up, do a little bit of research, actually do your own research. Don't just take our word for it, but actually do some of your own research to really dive deep into some of the things we've been talking about. And furthermore, how much research is available out there on so many different things and topics that you might not even think to ask right now. As far as getting involved with Veterans Ending the Stigma, we're online. What we are is an educational group. So if you got a story to share, or you're interested in getting involved in being a part of what we do and becoming part of our speaking crew, or just joining up and being a part of something where you could feel involved, you can find us online. Our email is there. We are in the works right now of hopefully developing a community center where we can start pushing this harm reduction model, kind of take these VSOs away from this whole alcohol component and actually start replacing that alcohol with some of this cannabis and free talk and conversation.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for sharing. We are going to wrap this thing up tonight. I really appreciate everyone coming through and sharing their experiences and their expertise tonight about medical cannabis. Don't forget, make sure that you are calling your senators, make sure you are registered to vote, because it is up to us in our community to be the change that we want to see. So once again, we'd like to thank everyone that spoke tonight. We would love to thank our sponsor, Cresco Labs, for also sponsoring this event this evening. And we also encourage you to get involved with your nearest VSO, whether that be minority veterans or veterans ending the stigma. If anything, if you can't do anything else, donate your time and your voice. There's also a link in the chat, which is givebutter.com/buildmba, which goes directly to our advocacy and legislative efforts that we are currently trying to make sure that everyone has the rights to the resources that they need. So again, everyone, thank you. And we are going to sign off for the evening. Don't forget to stay lit this 420. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Have a good night.